Hello class, here's another example of working with Java methods. In this case, we're going to work with strings. We're going to code a method that takes a string parameter and returns a different string. And what we would do in this case is we're going to work with a person's name, a full name, a first name and a last name. And we're going to use some code that was actually back in chapter 4, where there was a discussion of strings and string methods. And there was an interesting couple of lines back there that showed you how to take a full name and extract the first name and the last name from that by using string methods. Here it is. Back in the textbook, it's back on page 136. And if you go to the bottom of the page, here's the code here. I've highlighted it in light blue. You use the index of method on the string. This assumes that string S contains the full name. And you use the index of method and specify a space inside that to locate the space between the two names. And that returns an integer. And once you have that value, you can use it with substring to read the first name and the last name. The first name, using s.substring 0, k, that'll read from character 0 up to 1 less than k, because you don't want the space to be in the first name. You want to stop one character before the space, and actually that's the way the substring method works with two parameters. Now, the last name is going to use s.substring with just one argument, but we don't want to start reading at k. We want to start at k plus 1, the first character past the space, right? So this will very nicely extract the first name and the last name out of a full name. Well, we'll use that code back in our method that we're going to write back here in Eclipse. So what we'll do is we'll ask the user to enter their first and last name, in other words, the full name. We have to create a scanner object, of course. I've created one called input to read input from the keyboard. System.in is Java's name for the keyboard. And you notice that we have imported the scanner class from the java.util package. Scanner is not available in the java.lang default package, which is always available to us. We have to import it from the java.util package. Once we've done that, we can use that to prompt the user for the user's first and last name. We'll store that in a string variable called full name. Now notice we're using next line. That's a very important requirement here, because if we want to read two names separated by a space, the other input, the other scanner method that is okay for entering strings will not work. Input.next parentheses also accepts a string, but it stops reading characters when it encounters a space. Well, obviously that's not going to work for a name with a space in between the first and last name. So whenever you want to read a string that's got spaces in it, you must use next line. And then we'll close our input object. If we don't do that, we get that nag, right? So input.close will remove the nag. I'll just show you what I mean here by commenting it out. There's the nag that we've got a little warning, a resource leak. Well, if we close it, that gets rid of it. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll just parrot back whatever the user entered, full name, but then we're going to get the name alphabetically. I thought it would be interesting to take that name and rearrange it in the usual alpha fashion, which is last name, comma, space, first name. And we'll do that in a method called alpha name, which takes the full name as its argument. So here's the definition of alpha name down below. As you can see, it's public and static. It's got to be static because in order to run this method in main, which is static, we have to make this method static as well. It's going to return a string, and it's called alpha name. And here's the parameter that we're going to use internally inside this method. First thing we're going to do is we're going to use that same code that we saw back there in the textbook. We're going to determine where the space is, get the first name and the last name, and then we'll return a string by concatenating together the last and the first, but in between them, a comma and a space, so that it should return the name in the usual alphabetical fashion. So we'll give it a run. And I'll pay homage to the creator of Java, Mr. Gosling. And it looks like it's working properly. There's the name in the usual alpha order. Okay, this method returned a string, and it took a string parameter here. So we had to pass it a string when we run it up in main. We executed up in main, and we embedded it inside the print line, as you can see here, and the name got thrown into that location right there to become part of the output of the print line.